So yeah, that was a lot in about 20 minutes. Like I said, I will let me reshare. There's those links if you want to get deeper in. I got a lot. Like I said, I took 3 hours and put it into 15 minutes. I will also say I'm very happy to work with state parties to do specific presentations to them based on what kind of system they're interested in and things like that. I'll also say this is kind of a rare thing for me in talking to Maryland, where I know you guys are already ahead of the game in a lot of this stuff that I've talked about. So, kudos for that. And, I think the key now is I see the Maryland Green Party and the Baltimore Green Party being on point on a lot of this stuff. How do we get it out to the rest of Maryland? How do we diffuse this knowledge and these best practices out? So with that, I will wrap.
Let me, if I could, just very quickly answer Vince Tola's second question here. He's asking, are there resources, books, etc., that can succinctly explain how globalization and neoliberalism has affected local communities, and what are the progressive solutions to these powerful forces? Now, this is, okay, with respect, I would very gently challenge the posture of that question. We need to recognize that people that live in local communities are subject matter experts on how the community policies are impacting their lives, right? And so when we come to them and when we say, well, I want to explain neoliberalism to you, while that is probably precisely what is impacting their lives, we need to be able to frame things in a way that points out privatization and union busting and some of these other things that are hallmarks of the neoliberal, agenda. One good way to look at it is in public schools, for example. Kids aren't learning such and such. Well, that's because of the standardized test. If it's not on the test, it's not going to get discussed. So we have to hone that discussion to what is actually happening to people on the ground, because like it or not, no matter how smart we are as Greens, to the individual person in our communities, our green smarts is never going to be as important as their life experience, right? So we need to always gear that conversation toward that. But what I would say is, what a perfect example of a political education forum that you can invite people to, so that they can make that connection to them for themselves. So thank you.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that really, really quick, in my before I became a preschool teacher, I worked I worked many jobs, but one of them was a field director for a community organization. And what that really taught me was that oppressed communities don't need me to go in and explain capitalism, neoliberalism to them. They actually probably know it better than I do. They just don't have the academic language that I do. I always talk about, when I was knocking doors in this neighborhood, after an hour-long conversation that was supposed to have been a 5-minute conversation based on what I told my employees or my staff, but I stayed and talked to this guy for an hour, and at the end, when I walked away, I wrote on top of his cards, Foucault, and doesn't know it. Because this young 20-something Black man talked about power using language exactly similar to that of Michel Foucault, who is, who is a inaccessible academic postmodernist, right? But the understanding of power, without having any idea who Foucault was he had an understanding that was fundamental and core, and so when we go into these situations, I think it's important for us to understand that, and this is a very Marxist thing kind of what I'm about to say, but that these common conditions like capitalism, like white supremacy, they manifest in every location slightly different. So you can really understand capitalism, neoliberalism, white supremacy, and not understand how it plays out in this local community. And that's why we have to listen. That's why we have to get engaged in these deep conversations, this relationship building, so that when someone starts describing the experiences of capitalism and white supremacy, which make it, which have oppressed them, then we can enter into the conversation, make connections to how this is why independent political organizing is essential. This is why engagement, not disengagement, is important. We can, once we hear them in their own words talk about how these things are affecting them locally, then we can start to plug in a lot more effectively than if we go in trying to talk about neoliberalism and waiting for them to try to make those connections. We've got to let people express their lived experience, and then it's our job as political organizers to help them make connections, to inoculate them against how hard this work is going to be and what we face, and to provide them with an organizing path forward. And I think it's essential that we focus on providing them with an organizing path forward, not a slogan. Right? We see AOC running on abolish ICE and then voting to fund ICE. We see her running, yelling abolish the police and then voting for more police funding. So I think it's really important that we are all, just like with social media, we're always pointing back towards, real physical political organizing.